Welcome. This video series is called Why Lancaster, Ohio is the Worst Place I Ever Lived. And it is detailing a period of my life in 2010 when I moved and lived in Lancaster, Ohio for 1 year. And it was an absolute nightmare, but I met the most glorious assortment of people that would have filled out a David Lynch film cast with no issues whatsoever. So sit back and enjoy. This first one will detail some of my immediate neighbors after I moved into this apartment on either side of me. And it's part one of a little bit of an ongoing series. So sit back and have a good one. I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio, and I had lived there for most of my life. And I had decided to move to Lancaster, Ohio, which is 45 minutes southeast. It's a smallish town. You're talking maybe 35, 40,000 people. And what I saw was there was this row of like 5 apartments. And they were like 3 bedrooms, had a basement, and it was cheap. It was maybe at the time, maybe $530. And, pretty roomy and stuff. And I was like, well. And I took a look at it. It was in the wintertime. It was like 10 degrees out. And so there was like nobody outside, just to give a preference or anything. So, it was a little poor area, but, it wasn't bad or whatever. Didn't look too bad. And so it's like, let me give it a shot. I knew somebody that lived in that same building or whatever. And so I did it. And, there was a lot of issues. To say that they were kind of slumlords, I mean, fair assessment. The windows were super old and thin, and they didn't heat and everything. There was no AC. There was heat but no AC, and it was just grimy and nasty and dirty, and anyways, so there was not very much upkeep in these apartments at all. And so I moved in there, and I can't recall much. I know the people, if I was facing, looking out my front door, people to the left, excuse me, there's an older woman, and her daughter had some extra chromosomes. And I don't say that derogatory. I mean, she came over the second day I lived there, knocked on my door and said, hey, my daughter's got some extra chromosomes, and she can get very loud sometimes. And I said, that's fine. I was younger. I like to listen to music and stuff. And, it didn't, bother me. But I did think it was kind of weird just to, knock on the door. And I don't know, I guess, there was a lot of sounds and everything. And look, I get it. There's a lot of different people with different concerns and stuff. So, I mean, it didn't bother me in the least. And everything. So it's not something I laugh about or make fun of. It, was just very legitimate concerns. But the people to the right, it was another older lady. And so, originally I just saw her and that was it. And I remember one day, and I'm not sure what happened, but I remember the lady to the right, she had lived in that place for like 18 years, which is about 17 and a half years longer than anybody else, because most people would rent for a couple months and they take off. And so she had lived there forever. And then next thing I know, there was an older gentleman, but younger than her, but older, living there. And so I thought maybe it was a husband or boyfriend or whatever. Maybe I just didn't notice him. But actually it was her grown-up son, and who had never left the womb, basically. And so he was an interesting person. But, yeah, definitely one of those failure to launch types. Okay, no big deal. But it's like the people kept multiplying there. So next thing I know, there was another guy, and he was younger. He was about my age, but he looked about 2 decades older. Missing teeth, and he was pretty bad off. And then it was either his girlfriend or wife, and then their 2 kids who were much younger. And and so he was always sitting up, and they were always sitting on the porch smoking cigarettes and drinking Busch beer. just constantly. And because they were living with him, and I can't remember if it was her mom or if it was his mom, they would have all their fights out on their front porch. And mind you, their front porch, my one sofa's right here in the window, and these are paper thin windows. So, I mean, I'd hear their fights constantly, all the time. I'd be sitting there trying to watch TV, and I'd hear their fights. And, it was never physical. It was just, a lot of verbal and stuff. But I'm like, oh, my God, this is a nightmare. I'm like, I went from a very quiet neighborhood, I mean, there was some crime or stuff, but it wasn't, people weren't, whatever. Everybody acted right. And so they're constantly fighting. And and I remember one time that he was getting into it with another guy. I don't know why. There's some guy across the street, a couple doors down, but they're arguing about something. When you got no job and you spend all day drinking, Mad Dog 2020 and Busch Light, arguments arise over whatever. And so the guy lives across the street starts to storm off, stops in the middle of the road, turns around, and yells out, "You're a weenie." And I'm like, I never heard a grown man call another grown man a weenie before, let alone in the middle of the road, And so, I mean, I just like, is this real life? Yeah. It's a fucked up Twilight Zone at this point. And so he storms off. And, the other thing I remember about this, too, is the gentleman that lived there, like I say, he'd be drinking. He liked to take bike rides with his son, which is good. It's great. Problem is, he'd be drinking all day long before doing the bike rides, and he would wreck. And so I remember one time, him and his son, they go riding off, and about 15 feet later, right behind where my truck was, he starts to wobble and starts to shake, and then he crashes. And he's sitting there laying face up in the road, cigarette dangling out of his mouth for like 5 minutes, just laying there, continuing to smoke this cigarette. And it felt like an eternity, or whatever, but he's laying there for like 5 minutes. And he's just, I'm like, is he dead? Is he alive? What's going on? And he finally brings himself to his feet, still got the bent cigarette, still smoking it or whatever. And his son is like 8, like looking around, seeing if anyone to see what happened. And his son locked eyes with me because I'm sitting there like looking out my window, and he knew that I knew, and it's just like, man, I felt bad for the kid. Like, my dad's a fucking loser, I mean, it gotta be a terrible sensation or whatever. But and to top it off, about a week later, I remember the family come rolling up in their little family truckster, which is a Geo. And he out pops the family, and he comes out, and he's hobbling with his arm in a sling and a brace on his knee. And apparently he had taken another spill on the bike or whatever. And I'm like, I would think you would learn your lesson the last time. Again, I say it's admirable to take a bike ride with your son and everything, but if you can't hold off on the booze beforehand, there's not a lot to admire for that. And so, I mean, it was an interesting situation. And so also, because they would drink, and I mean, it'd be like 20 cans of beer, sometimes 25. Well, for one point, I didn't take my trash cans around back. And so it's just a tiny front yard. It's like 4 feet, nothing to the street. And, our porches or stoops or whatever. And so I left my trash cans in the front by my stoop. And I come home and look at my trash can, and there's a bunch of Busch Light cans in it. And I'm like, use my trash can. Yeah, that's great. So I took that trash can, dumped the cans of beer on his porch. Because I was upset because he used my trash can. But the funny part was, it stayed there for like a week. Nobody picked anything up. Nobody did anything. It just stayed there. We never had any beefs or whatever. Well, there was one instance where, I knew the other gentleman a couple doors down, but we had a mutual friend, me and the other gentleman, not the guy that was on the porch, but somebody else a couple doors down. We had a mutual friend, and so he came up and he was like hanging out with both of us, just bouncing between stuff or whatever. And he had this big truck, and he was with his girlfriend or whatever. And so he goes to leave. I'm because one guy was drunk. But it wasn't the guy who was driving wasn't drunk. But the other guy was drunk. But I went back into my apartment. I was like, dude, this fucking, I'm done. Yeah, it's hot. I just, whatever. I hear this loud crack, and I hear some people yelling. So what happened is my buddy in the truck, him and his girlfriend, they backed into their Geo Metro twice. And so they start to pull up. These people are yelling at them. And so I come out the front door because I'm thinking there's a fight going on. Because, a little backstory, too. The guy knew he had been drunk most of the day, and he had gotten a little physical with the one guy that lives on the porch or whatever. Long story short, the dude didn't want any part of it. But anyways, there's a little bit of there. But Arbella didn't do this on purpose, right? He did it on accident. It was funny. He had the little sliding thing in between the driver and the passenger or whatever. He slides in. He looks back. He's like, "Did I hit your car?" And the guy's like, "Yes, you fucking hit it twice." The lady said it or whatever. He's like, "Oh," and then he drives off. And I'm standing there like, "Oh fuck!" I'm just like, "Oh shit!" So they turn and look at me, and I'm like, so they weren't going to say anything to me, but the guy lived a couple doors down. His old lady comes out, and they're raising up a storm to her. And we look, and there was no damage to the car. I mean, it really wasn't. They just tapped it twice or whatever. Having said that, I get it. You're going to be a little upset. So they're freaking out. And she's like, "Look, there's no damage or whatever." And they start yelling at her. And that's why hey, dude, I was like, "Don't yell at her. She didn't hit your car. You got a problem, you take it up with those people. I don't know who they are." And so we're going to call the police. I'm like, "Fine, if you need to do that, then call the police, but, whatever." All this goes on, and I had inadvertently, because I jumped up to check out what was going on, I'm now locked out of my apartment. So I'm locked out. I can't get in my apartment. And, I was a little, but, I don't know, I think she was drunk and passed out. I don't know what it was. Anyways, I couldn't get in. I couldn't wake up roommate. And so I'm just like, man, too much stuff's happened. So I'm like, I'm gonna run down to the store or whatever. So I drove down, and I think I went to Lowe's or something. I don't know what I did. And suffice to say, I come back, and the cops are here now, and they're talking to the neighbor a couple doors down. And so I get home and I get out. I'm trying to make a beeline for my apartment, hoping that the door's unlocked now and I can get in there, because I was like, I don't want to talk to the cops or whatever. So the guy a couple doors down, like, hey, he might know who they are. Now, he knows who they are, but he's not going to tell the cops. And so he calls me over. I'm like, oh, my God. And so I remember there's a cop. There's a female cop, and there's a male cop. The male cop looked a little bit like David Duchovny, funny enough. And so he's like, hey, who are those people we were hanging out with earlier? Do you know who they were? Just trying to play dumb. And I'm like, and so I just threw my hands up, and the cop's like, oh, so we're going to get more of the same from you. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not answering. I'm just, and they're going on and saying, we could charge you guys with obstruction. And I'm just like, yeah. And so then the guy two doors down, he's talking to the female cop, and he's like, hey, you're probably a daddy's girl, right? I'm like, dude, what are you fucking doing? Because he's drunk and stuff. And I'm like, you're going to get arrested. Well, his daughter comes out, because the guy says, the male cop's like, you're going to tell me you guys were hanging out with this guy all day long. You don't know his name. And he's like, no, I don't know who he is. His daughter comes down. I was like, yes, you do. Blah, blah, blah. And says the name. You know, she was like sick. And so at that point, he's all like, to the cop, what do you expect? I ain't diming my bros out. And so I took him. I was like, dude, go inside your house. And I said, I got him inside. I said, do what you guys need to do. I don't know the guy. And so I remember the cops like went down just like, right across the next street over and hung out for like a while. I think they're waiting to see if he came back out of his apartment. Because I told his old lady, I said, whatever you do, don't let him come back out of his apartment because they're going to arrest him for drunk and disorderly. No doubt about it. And so I said, keep him in his apartment. The funny part is, like, they did somehow figure out, because the deputy, whatever, paid a visit to the guy. I don't know how, they did, because, I mean, but they did somehow figure that out. They solved the caper. Nothing ever happened. I mean, it's like, what are you going to do? There's no videos, nothing come up or whatever. But it was kind of funny because I just remember trying to get to my apartment and being like, I don't want to be, I was tired. I was the only person, I was completely, sober. And he's like, oh, come over. I'm like, fuck, I was like, I'm great. Now I got to deal with this crap, which I'd been already dealing with the drunkenness all day from him. And so the last thing I wanted was more BS. I didn't tell the other guy to come over. I didn't know any of this. And somehow I'm getting constantly wrapped back into this, somehow looped in. And so suffice to say, there's a lot more stories. This is kind of like the primer because some of these people who live there, it was interesting to say the least. But that was the great mystery of the vehicle. So the door backing in. But I still think that was funny. You open the thing. I was like, did I hit your car? Yeah, you did. Oh, okay. Just driving off, and I'm just like, great. It's like one of those moments you're like thinking you're in a movie, and you're not. It's real life, but real life's crazier than a movie sometimes. So, well, that's all. I'm gonna get back to working on my actual production videos. This is just me goofing about. Thanks, everybody.